Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. I need to tell you something before we start. These 9 cases, they're all connected by one thing. Routine work in isolated places. That's it. Normal people, normal jobs, until something went very, very wrong. Oregon keeps records, employment logs, radio transmissions, inspection reports. Official documentation that's supposed to be boring paperwork. Except sometimes, buried in those files, you find things that don't make sense. Timestamps that contradict each other. Signatures from people who shouldn't exist. Audio recordings that get cut off mid-sentence. I've spent weeks going through this material, and honestly, there are parts I still can't explain. Parts that made me double-check if I was reading fiction or actual filed reports. Before we dive in, subscribe to Mr. Midnight if you want more of this. Real cases, real documentation, no drama. Just the facts that'll keep you up at night. Oh, and fair warning, by story number 3, you'll understand why certain forest routes in Oregon were permanently discontinued. Nobody talks about why, but after tonight, you will. Let's begin with the first case. My name is Carlos Rivera, and I've been a licensed septic system inspector for the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality for 11 years. Started right out of college with my environmental science degree, thinking I'd make a difference protecting Oregon's groundwater. My dad always said I had a strong stomach. Growing up on his dairy farm, I'd seen plenty of disgusting things. Dead cattle bloated in summer heat. Manure lagoons that made your eyes water. But nothing prepared me for what I found in the Umpqua National Forest on March 15, 2024. I should have known something was wrong when my hands started shaking that morning. Not from coffee, I hadn't even had any yet. Just this weird feeling in my gut, like when you're a kid and you know you're about to get in trouble, but you don't know why. The call came in around 9. Janet, my supervisor, dropped the paperwork on my desk with that look she gets when she's trying not to think about what she's asking me to do. Court-ordered inspection, she said. 2847 Timber Creek Road. Neighbors have been calling for months about sewage smell and contaminated well water. Property owner hasn't responded to any notices. I picked up the file. Robert Chen, 43 years old, lived alone on 40 acres of forest land. The complaint started 6 months ago. Neighbors smelling raw sewage, then their wells testing positive for contamination. The health department had tried to reach him dozens of times. Nothing. Like he'd just vanished. GPS cords are in the file, Janet said. It's way back in the woods. Cell service is spotty up there, so keep your radio on. I loaded my truck with the usual gear. Soil probe for testing, contamination levels, pH strips and chemical testing kits. Camera for documentation. Rubber boots that went up to my knees. Respirator mask rated for hazardous chemicals. Crowbar for opening tank covers. Everything I'd need for a routine septic failure inspection. The drive took 50 minutes on increasingly narrow roads. Started on Highway 138, then turned onto Forest Service roads that got smaller and smaller until I was following barely visible tire tracks through thick pine forest. The GPS kept losing signal, then finding it again, the little arrow spinning around like it was confused. Rain had been falling for 3 days straight. Not the gentle Oregon mist, hard, heavy drops that turned dirt roads into mud soup. My truck's wheels kept spinning and sliding. Twice I had to gun it through puddles deep enough to splash my windshield. The trees got taller as I drove deeper into the forest. Old-growth Douglas firs that blocked out most of the gray sky. The kind of woods where it's always twilight, even at noon. Where sounds get swallowed up and you feel like you're the only person left in the world. I found the property at the end of a rutted driveway that disappeared into the trees. No mailbox, no house number, just a gap in the forest that barely fit my truck. The house sat in a small clearing, surrounded by trees so tall they made the cabin look like a toy. Single story, probably built in the 70s. Brown wood siding that was starting to rot at the bottom. Several windows were boarded up with plywood. Paint peeling off in long strips that fluttered in the wind like dead skin. No cars in the driveway. No lights in the windows. No smoke from the chimney. The whole place felt empty in a way that made my skin crawl. Not just empty, abandoned. Like something bad had happened here and everyone had left in a hurry. But the smell hit me before I even got out of my truck. Raw sewage, but wrong somehow. Stronger than it should be. Sweet and chemical and rotten all mixed together. It made my nose burn and my stomach twist. I've smelled plenty of failed septic systems in 11 years, but this was different. This smell had weight to it, like it was pushing against you. I sat in my truck for a minute, engine running, trying to convince myself to get out. The radio crackled with static. No cell signal this far into the woods. If something went wrong, help was 50 minutes away on muddy roads. But I had a job to do. State Environmental Protection Mandate. Court order. If I didn't inspect this system, people would keep drinking contaminated water. I pulled on my boots and grabbed my equipment. The mud was thick enough to suck at my feet with every step. Rain dripped steadily from the pine branches overhead, pattering on my hard hat like nervous fingers drumming. The septic tank should be about 50 feet behind the house, according to the property records. I started walking around back, testing the soil every few steps with my probe. The contamination readings were insane, 400% higher than safe levels. Numbers I'd never seen before in 11 years of testing. That's when I saw the drain field. Black liquid was seeping up through the ground in multiple spots. Not just wet soil, actual puddles of dark, oily sewage that reflected the gray sky like dirty mirrors. The grass was dead in a perfect rectangle where the underground pipes ran, dead for months, from the look of it. I took photos, making notes on my waterproof clipboard. The smell was getting stronger as I moved closer to where the tank should be. My eyes were starting to water, even though I was breathing through my mouth. Then I found the access cover. It was partially buried under dead leaves and mud, but I could see it had been opened recently. The concrete cover was slightly askew, and the metal bolts were loose. There were fresh tool marks on the hardware, scratches in the metal that were still bright, not rusted over. That stopped me cold. Homeowners almost never open their septic tanks themselves. It's dangerous. Hydrogen sulfide gas can kill you in minutes. Most people don't even know where their tank is, let alone have the tools to open it. I called the main office on my radio. Static burst through the speaker before Janet's voice came through, broken and distant. "Janet, this is Carlos. I'm at the Timber Creek property. The contamination levels are off the charts, and it looks like someone's been inside the tank recently." More static. Then, "Copy that." "How bad?" "Bad enough that we might need a hazmat team. The chemical smell up here is really strong, and the tank cover's been opened. Document everything. Get out if you feel unsafe." I should have listened to that advice. Should have taken my photos and left. Should have called for backup right then. But I didn't. Because I'm good at my job. Because in 11 years I'd never backed down from a contaminated site. Because my dad raised me to finish what I started. I needed to open that tank and see what was causing the contamination. Standard procedure. I'd done it hundreds of times before. I put on my respirator mask and work gloves. The chemical smell was so strong it was making my eyes stream tears. I used my crowbar to pry up the heavy concrete cover, working slowly and carefully. The smell that came up from that tank was like nothing I'd ever experienced in my life. It burned through my respirator like it wasn't there. Sweet and chemical and rotten and something else, something that made every animal instinct in my brain start screaming. I stumbled backward and almost fell, gasping and choking. My flashlight beam shook as I pointed it down into the tank. What I saw there broke something inside my mind. It wasn't just sewage floating in that black liquid. Pieces of clothing, a red winter jacket, faded blue jeans, a white sneaker with the laces still tied, and underneath, pale shapes that my brain didn't want to recognize. Bones, human bones, ribs poking up through the surface like broken white fingers. Part of a skull, eye sockets staring up at nothing. An arm bone still wearing a digital watch that blinked red numbers in the darkness. I dropped my flashlight. It hit the concrete with a loud crack, the beam spinning around wildly before going out. In that moment of complete darkness, with just the smell and the sound of liquid lapping gently against the tank walls, my mind finally understood what I was looking at. This wasn't a septic tank anymore. It was a grave. A chemical grave where someone had been dissolving human bodies. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely work my radio. Janet, I need police up here right now." Static. Then her voice, sharp with concern. "Carlos, what's wrong? You're breaking up. There are bodies in the tank." I was shouting now, backing away from that open pit. Human bodies. Multiple bodies. "Say again? Did you say bodies?" "Human remains in the septic tank. Send police and the medical examiner. And hazmat. The whole tank is full of chemicals and human remains. I kept backing up until I hit a tree, then stumbled around it and vomited in the ferns. My whole body was shaking. 11 years of inspecting the worst sewage disasters imaginable, and I'd never seen anything like this. Never smelled anything like this. Because this wasn't an accident. This wasn't contamination from a failed system. Someone had been using this tank as a body disposal site, dissolving people in chemicals and letting the contaminated liquids seep into the groundwater. How many people were down there? How long had this been going on? And where the hell was Robert Chen? I walked back to my truck on unsteady legs, trying not to breathe through my nose. My radio crackled again. Carlos, police are en route. Don't touch anything else. How many? How many bodies are we talking about? I looked back at that open tank, trying to count the pale shapes I'd seen in the chemical soup. I could see at least 3 skulls from here. Maybe more. They're all dissolved, mixed up with chemicals. Silence on the radio. Then, Jesus Christ. Okay, just wait for backup. Don't go near that thing again. But I'd already been near it. I'd been breathing that air for 20 minutes. My throat was burning, and my skin felt like it was crawling with tiny insects. Whatever chemicals they'd used to dissolve those bodies, I'd been exposed to them. The sirens took 35 minutes to reach me, echoing through the forest like the sound of civilization finally arriving in hell. 3 sheriff's cars, a fire truck, and an ambulance came sliding up that muddy road. Detective Sarah Kim was the first one out, a small Asian woman with hard eyes who looked like she'd seen plenty of bad things in her career. "Show me," she said. I led her to the tank, staying upwind. Even Detective Kim, who probably had 20 years of experience with crime scenes, went pale when she looked inside. "Holy shit," she whispered. "How many?" "At least 3 skulls, maybe more underneath." My voice sounded strange and distant, like someone else was talking. "They've been dissolved in chemicals. Mixed up." The fire chief, Murphy, arrived with the hazmat team an hour later. They had to suit up in full chemical protection gear before they could even approach the tank. I watched them work from inside my truck, windows rolled up, trying to process what I'd found. Detective Kim climbed into the passenger seat. "The property owner is Robert Chen," she said, reading from her notes. 43, unemployed. Neighbors say he moved here about 3 years ago, kept to himself, no visitors they ever saw. "When did he disappear?" "Best we can tell, about 6 months ago. Right around the time the neighbors started complaining about the smell." She looked toward the hazmat team working around the tank. 6 months of bodies decomposing in chemicals. That would explain your contamination readings. "How many people are we talking about? From what you saw?" 8, maybe 10. "We won't know for sure until they pump out the tank and examine all the remains." 8 people. Minimum. Murdered somewhere else, then brought here for disposal. I thought about all the missing person reports that must have been filed over the past 3 years. Families wondering what happened to their loved ones, never knowing they were dissolving in a chemical soup in the middle of the Oregon woods. The investigation took 6 days. They had to pump out the entire tank to recover the remains, wearing full hazmat suits because the chemical mixture was so toxic. The bodies had been dissolved in a combination of lye and sulfuric acid, industrial chemicals that Chen had apparently been buying for months from different suppliers to avoid suspicion. 8 people total. All of them had been reported missing over the past 3 years. College students from Eugene, a hiking couple from Portland, a truck driver who'd disappeared on Highway 138, 2 teenagers from Roseburg who'd gone camping and never came home. But the worst part came later, when the investigation expanded. The FBI found 3 other properties in different counties with identical contamination patterns. All of them had been maintained by the same septic service company, a business that Chen had been using as cover for his disposal operation. It wasn't just one killer, it was a network. A group of people who'd been using legitimate septic businesses to hide the evidence of their crimes. They'd pick isolated properties with failing septic systems, kill people somewhere else, then transport the bodies for disposal. The chemical contamination looked like ordinary septic failure to most inspectors. Chen was caught 3 weeks later at a motel in Nevada. DNA evidence from the tank linked him to all 8 victims. His partners in the septic company, 3 more men who'd been running this operation for over 5 years, were arrested the same day. 47 neighboring properties had been drinking contaminated groundwater. The chemical mixture had seeped into the local aquifer, poisoning wells for miles around. 12 people ended up hospitalized with chemical poisoning. 3 of them, an elderly couple and their granddaughter, nearly died from liver toxicity. The EPA declared it an environmental disaster. Cleanup cost over $2 million and took 8 months. They had to truck in clean water for the entire area while they pumped and treated the contaminated aquifer. As for me, well, that's where this story gets personal. The blood tests came back 2 weeks after the incident. Significant chemical exposure. My lungs showed scarring from inhaling acid fumes, and my liver enzymes were elevated to dangerous levels. The doctor, a kind man with gray hair who probably delivered bad news to people every day, sat me down in his office and explained that I'd need ongoing treatment for the rest of my life. The good news, he said, is that we caught it early. You'll recover most of your lung function with treatment, but you can't be exposed to industrial chemicals anymore. Your respiratory system won't handle it. No more field inspections. No more crawling through contaminated sites. No more doing the job I trained 11 years for and loved despite its challenges. I work a desk job now at the DEQ main office in Salem, processing paperwork, training new inspectors, answering phones. It's good work, important work, but it's not the same. Sometimes I catch myself looking out the window at the field inspection trucks in the parking lot and wondering if I'll ever get to use my soil probe again. The nightmare started about a month after the incident. Always the same dream. I'm back at that property, standing over the open tank. But this time, when I shine my flashlight into the darkness, the dissolved bodies start moving, reaching up toward me with skeletal fingers, trying to pull me down into that chemical soup. I wake up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat, tasting that sweet, rotten chemical smell in the back of my throat. My wife Maria holds me while I shake, whispering that it's over, that the bad men are in prison, that I'm safe. But I know I'll never really be safe from what I saw that day. It changed something fundamental in how I see the world. I used to think the worst contamination came from accidents or negligence, corporate shortcuts and sloppy procedures. I never imagined that someone would deliberately poison the earth to hide murder. Chen and his 3 partners were sentenced to life in prison without parole. The septic industry now has new background check requirements and monitoring protocols for all licensed contractors. The FBI created a special task force to investigate suspicious contamination patterns that might indicate criminal activity. But none of that brings back the 8 people who died. None of that undoes the poisoning of 47 families. None of that fixes my scarred lungs or gives me back the career I loved. I still drive past that road sometimes on my way to desk assignments in the field offices. The property is fenced off now, posted with permanent hazmat warnings. The cleanup is finished, but the land will probably never be safe for habitation again. Too much chemical contamination soaked too deep into the soil. Every time I see that turnoff, I remember the smell. That sweet, rotten chemical smell that burned through my respirator and changed my life forever. I remember the sight of human bones floating in acid soup. I remember the moment my flashlight went out and left me standing in darkness over that pit of dissolved humanity. And I remember thinking, in that moment of complete horror, that there are monsters in this world who look just like ordinary people, who hold regular jobs and pay their taxes and smile at their neighbors, until you find their septic tanks, until you discover what they've been hiding underground in the deep Oregon woods. My name is Carlos Rivera. I used to be a septic system inspector. Now I'm a survivor of something that shouldn't exist but does. And I'm telling you this story because somewhere out there are probably other properties with other tanks full of other victims. The next time you smell something wrong coming from the ground, don't assume it's just a broken pipe. Sometimes the earth itself is trying to tell you about the evil that's been buried in it. Sometimes the worst contamination comes from human beings. And sometimes, when you're doing your job in the deep woods of Oregon, you find horrors that will follow you home in your dreams for the rest of your life. My name is Danny Reeves, and for 12 years I delivered supplies to the most isolated communities in the Oregon Cascades. Not the tourist spots, the places you can't find on Google Maps, where families have lived for generations without ever registering with the state. Places where the old-growth forest is so thick that noon feels like twilight, and cell towers are just a rumor. I chose this work after my daughter Emma died in a car accident when she was 7. Sarah, my wife, couldn't stand the sight of me anymore, said I reminded her too much of what we'd lost. The divorce papers came 2 months after the funeral. Driving alone through the deep woods, delivering mail and supplies to people who'd been forgotten by the world, it felt right. Matched how empty I was inside. The families out there, they became something like a surrogate family to me. The Kowalski grandparents, who always asked to see pictures of Emma even though she was gone. Old Henrik Mueller, who spoke broken English, but always pressed a jar of his wife's preserves into my hands. The Yakima families who'd been living on unceded land since before Oregon was a state. They needed me, and I needed to be needed. Route 127 was my domain. 87 miles of logging roads, deer trails, and paths that existed only because people had walked them for 100 years. 13 stops total, serving maybe 40 people who lived so far off the grid that the government mail service had given up on them decades ago. Private company like ours stepped in, charged premium rates for what amounted to a lifeline to civilization. October 15, 2023. I remember the date because it was exactly 6 years since Emma died, and I'd started the morning by visiting her grave like I did every year. Told her about the families on my route, how the Mueller's granddaughter was learning to read, how Mrs. Chen's arthritis was getting better. Made her reel in the only way I had left. The weather was turning. That heavy gray Oregon sky that means rain for the next 6 months. Perfect mushroom hunting weather, which mattered because half my customers supplemented their income by foraging chanterelles and matsutake for Portland restaurants. My truck was loaded with preserving jars, salt, drying equipment, everything they needed for harvest season. First stop was always the Mueller place, about 30 miles up Forest Service Road 46. Henrik was 83, his wife Greta maybe 78, both of them tough as the old-growth fir trees around their cabin. Lived there since 1967, completely self-sufficient except for medical supplies and the occasional luxury like coffee or sugar. When I pulled into their clearing, Henrik didn't come out to greet me like usual. Their cabin looked different too, windows covered with what looked like thick black plastic, front door barricaded with furniture stacked against it from the inside. I knocked on the door. "Mr. Mueller, it's Danny with your delivery." A voice came from inside, but it wasn't Henrik's accent I'd known for 12 years. This voice was flat, emotionless. "Leave the packages and go away." "Henrik, are you okay? Is Greta all right?" Silence for a long moment. Then, "We are changing. The forest teaches us. Leave the packages and go away." Through a gap in the plastic covering the kitchen window, I caught a glimpse of movement inside. Someone tall and thin, moving in a way that didn't look right. Too fluid, like joints bending in directions they shouldn't. I left their packages on the porch and got back in my truck, but my hands were shaking. In 12 years, Henrik had never told me to go away. When Greta had pneumonia 3 winters back, he'd begged me to stay for coffee, desperate for human contact during her recovery. Second stop was the Chen family compound, Thate SF. Grandmother, parents, 3 kids ranging from 8 to 16. They ran a small ginseng farm and sold to traditional medicine shops in Portland's Jade District. Grandmother Chen spoke almost no English, but she always smiled when she saw me and pressed origami cranes made from old mail catalogs into my hands. Their property felt wrong before I even got out of the truck. The ginseng plants that should have been ready for harvest were black and withered, like someone had poured acid on them. The family's dogs, 3 border collies who usually rushed to greet me, were nowhere to be seen. I found them behind the chicken coop. All 3 dogs, arranged in a perfect triangle, facing inward. They'd been dead for days, but there were no wounds, no signs of injury, just dead, positioned with mathematical precision. The front door of the house was standing open. Inside, I could see Mrs. Chen stirring something in a large pot on their wood stove. She moved slowly, mechanically, like she was sleepwalking. "Mrs. Chen?" "Package delivery." She turned toward me, and I saw her face. Her skin had a grayish tinge, like old meat, and her eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, the entire eye, from corner to corner, was the color of deep water. "Danny," she said in perfect English, though she'd never spoken more than 5 words to me in 12 years. "We've been waiting for you." Behind her, the rest of the family emerged from other rooms. All of them had the same gray skin, the same black eyes, the same mechanical movement. The youngest boy, Tommy, who used to run to my truck every week, stared at me with those lightless eyes and smiled. His teeth were stained dark brown, like he'd been chewing on dirt. "The forest has such wonderful gifts," Mrs. Chen continued in that eerily perfect English. "Would you like to stay for dinner? We're making soup." The smell hit me then, sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long in the sun. But underneath it was something else, something that made my stomach turn. Meat that had gone bad. I backed away from the door. I have to finish my route, maybe next time." "Next time," she agreed, still smiling. "Yes, next time you'll stay." I ran back to my truck and drove away fast, my heart hammering. In my mirror, I could see the entire Chen family standing in their doorway, watching me leave. They stood perfectly still, like statues, until the trees hid them from view. Something was very wrong on my route, but I couldn't abandon the other families. The Yakima settlement was next, 3 related families who'd lived on traditional land for generations. If something dangerous was spreading through the woods, they needed to know. But when I reached the turnoff for their settlement, the road was blocked, not by fallen trees or landslides, by a wall. Someone had built a wall of woven branches, mud, and what looked like bones across the entire width of the road. It was maybe 8 feet tall and stretched between 2 massive Douglas firs. Woven into the wall were animal skulls, deer, elk, bear, smaller creatures I couldn't identify. And centered at eye level, a human skull. Old, yellowed with age, but definitely human. A voice called out from beyond the wall, "Turn around, postal man. This place is not for you anymore." I recognized the voice, Joseph Crow Feather, the settlement's eldest, but he'd never called me postal man before. Always Danny or friend Danny, and his voice sounded different, deeper, with harmonics that made my teeth ache. "Joseph, it's me, Danny. I have your medical supplies. Sarah's insulin. Sarah doesn't need insulin anymore. Sarah doesn't need anything anymore. The forest provides all." "What does that mean? Is Sarah okay?" Laughter came from behind the wall. Multiple voices laughing in perfect unison, like a recording played through several speakers. "Sarah is perfect now. We are all perfect now. The old ways are returning." I left their packages at the base of the wall and drove away, my hands shaking worse now. 3 stops, 3 families acting completely wrong. But I had to continue. The other stops might need help, might need warning about whatever was happening. The next 6 stops were abandoned. Not just empty, abandoned like the families had left in a hurry. Doors standing open, food still on tables, clothes scattered on floors, but no signs of violence, no blood, no bodies, just gone. At the Williams place, I found something that made my blood freeze. Their kitchen table was set for dinner, 5 place settings, food still on the plates, but the food wasn't anything I could identify. It looked organic, biological, but wrong. Like someone had tried to recreate normal food using only forest materials. 7 leaves shaped like meat, moss arranged like vegetables, bark carved into bread-like shapes. And in the center of the table, a ceramic bowl filled with human teeth. Not just a few, dozens of them, all different sizes, some with roots still attached. My radio crackled to life. First time all day I'd gotten any signal this deep in the woods. Danny, are you out there?" It was Marcus, my dispatcher back in town. I grabbed the handset. "Marcus. Thank God. Something's very wrong on Route 127. Families are missing, or acting strange, or... Danny, you need to get back here right now. State police are looking for you." "Why are state police looking for me?" "Because the families on your route, Danny, they've been dead for weeks." The radio went silent. I stared at it, trying to process what he'd said. "Marcus, what do you mean they've been dead?" His voice came back faint and staticky. "Hikers found bodies at the Chen place yesterday. Whole family, decomposed like they'd been dead for a month." "But Danny, their delivery logs show you've been signing for packages there every week." My delivery scanner. I pulled it out and scrolled through the day's entries. There they were, signatures from Henrik Mueller, Mrs. Chen, Joseph Crow Feather, all in my handwriting, but I didn't remember signing any of them. "Marcus, I was just at those places. I talked to these people. They were different, but they were alive. Danny, are you feeling okay? Have you been taking any medication? Drinking?" I hadn't touched alcohol since Emma died, hadn't taken anything stronger than aspirin in years. I'm not drunk, Marcus. I'm not crazy. Something's happening out here. Just come back, okay? Let the police sort this out. I turned my truck around and started heading back toward town, but something made me stop at the Chen place one more time. I had to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. The clearing was empty. No house, no ginseng farm, no chicken coop. Just old-growth forest, trees so massive and ancient they must have been there for centuries. The ground where the house should have been was covered in thick moss, undisturbed except for a perfect circle of mushrooms. Mushrooms I'd never seen before, pale white caps with black gills, growing in a ring maybe 20 feet across. I got out of my truck and walked to the center of the ring. The silence was absolute Bertie. No birds, no insects, no wind in the trees. Just silence so complete it felt like being underwater. That's when I saw them. Bones, scattered in the moss. Human bones, old and yellow, arranged in patterns that hurt my eyes to look at. And nestled among the bones, my delivery packages from that day. Soggy with rain that hadn't been falling when I'd left them there an hour ago. I ran back to my truck and gunned it toward town. But the road seemed longer than it should have been. Miles longer. The sun was setting, though it had been mid-afternoon when I'd started back. Time felt elastic, unreliable. My radio crackled again. This time, the voice wasn't Marcus. Danny. It was Emma's voice, my dead daughter's voice, clear as if she was sitting next to me. I nearly drove off the road. Emma? Daddy, why didn't you come find me sooner? Tears were streaming down my face. Baby, you died. You've been gone for 6 years. I've been waiting in the forest, Daddy, waiting with all the other children. The forest takes care of us now. Emma, that's not real. You're not real. I'm as real as the families you delivered to today. As real as Henrik and Mrs. Chen and Joseph. The forest makes us real when you need us to be real. The truth hit me like a physical blow. How long? I whispered. How long have they been dead? Since you started coming here, Daddy. Since you needed a family to replace the one you lost. The forest felt your need and gave you what you wanted. A purpose. People who needed you. I pulled over and put my head in my hands. I'm going crazy. I've been going crazy for 12 years. Not crazy, Daddy, just sad. The forest understands sadness. It understands loss. It makes sad people whole again. By making me think dead people are alive? By making dead people alive for you, when you needed them to be. I looked up and saw something that broke whatever was left of my sanity. Standing in the trees around my truck were all of them. Ulrich and Greta Mueller, the Chen family, Joseph Crowfeather and his people, the Williams family. All the families from my route, standing silent among the massive firs. But they weren't gray and wrong anymore. They looked normal, alive, the way I remembered them. Henrik waved and smiled. Little Tommy Chen grinned and held up a drawing he'd made. Mrs. Williams called out, "Thank you, Danny," in her sweet grandmother voice. And standing with them, holding Joseph's hand, was Emma. 6 years old forever, wearing the same pink dress she'd died in. "You can stay with us, Daddy. The forest will take care of you too. You'll never have to be alone again." I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to get out of that truck and join them. To be with Emma again. To be needed by people who cared about me. To never face another empty house or sleepless night. Instead, I put the truck in gear and drove away. The police found me 3 hours later, sitting in my truck in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner in Sweet Home, crying so hard I couldn't speak. They took me to the hospital for evaluation, then to the police station for questioning. The investigation took weeks. They found the bodies eventually, scattered through miles of old-growth forest, some of them decades old. Henrik Mueller had died in 1998, 2 years before I'd even taken the job. The Chen family had been killed in a home invasion in 2015. But somehow, I'd been delivering to their property and logging signatures every week for 8 years. The official conclusion was that I'd suffered a prolonged psychotic break triggered by grief. That I'd been driving into the woods every week and hallucinating interactions with people who were long dead, forging delivery confirmations to cover up my delusions. They were wrong about one thing, though. It wasn't a psychotic break, it was mercy. The forest understood what I needed. A family to serve, people who depended on me, a reason to keep going after losing everything that mattered. So, it gave me that, the only way it could. by making the dead live again, just for me, just enough to keep me from following Emma into the dark. I don't work for the delivery company anymore. Can't drive those mountain roads without hearing her voice calling to me. Instead, I work at a grief counseling center in Portland, helping other people who've lost children, who feel like their world ended with their worst day. Sometimes clients ask me how I survived losing a child, how I found meaning again after losing everything. I tell them the truth, though they never believe it. Sometimes, when you need them badly enough, the dead will come back and take care of you, until you're strong enough to take care of yourself. But I don't tell them about the dreams, how every night I dream about driving back into those woods, back to Emma and the families who needed me. How every morning I wake up with dirt under my fingernails and the smell of moss in my hair, because mercy has a price, and the forest is very, very patient. It knows that someday I'll be too tired to resist anymore, too lonely to remember why I left. And when that day comes, it will welcome me home to the family that's been waiting for me in the deep woods of Oregon, where the old-growth trees remember everything, and love is stronger than death, even if it has to make its own dead to prove it. My name is Janet Williams, and I've been running wilderness cleanup and biohazard removal services in Oregon's deep forests for 12 years. Most people don't know this kind of work exists, but when meth labs explode in remote areas, when hunters die alone in the woods, when illegal dumping sites need environmental restoration, that's when they call me. I've pulled decomposing bodies from abandoned cabins, cleaned up chemical spills in pristine watersheds, and sanitized crime scenes where things happened that never made the news. I chose this work because I love Oregon's wilderness, and somebody has to protect it from human contamination. The forests don't deserve to suffer for our mistakes. But what I found in the Cascade foothills last November made me realize that sometimes the wilderness protects itself. And sometimes that protection comes with a price that no living person should have to pay. The call came from the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality on a gray Tuesday morning in November. They needed immediate cleanup of what they called an unauthorized biological research facility discovered deep in the Willamette National Forest. The site had been abandoned for months, but satellite imagery showed significant environmental damage spreading outward from the location. They offered me $40,000 for a 5-day cleanup, more than I usually made in 6 months. I should have asked why they couldn't send their own teams. The coordinates led me 60 miles southeast of Salem, down logging roads that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Rain had been falling for 3 weeks straight, turning the forest floor into a carpet of rotting leaves and standing water. My truck's GPS lost signal 20 miles from the nearest highway. The deeper I drove into those woods, the quieter everything became. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter, even the insects had gone silent. The facility was a cluster of prefabricated buildings hidden in a grove of ancient Douglas firs. Their metal sidings streaked green with moss and corrosion. Solar panels covered every roof, still functioning despite the forest trying to reclaim them. A generator hummed somewhere in the distance, meaning someone was still powering this place. But there were no vehicles, no fresh tire tracks, no sign that anyone had been here in months. I parked 50 yards away and suited up in full environmental protection gear, Level A hazmat suit, self-contained breathing apparatus, chemical-resistant boots. The DEQ briefing had mentioned biological contamination, but no specifics about what kind. In this business, you assume everything is trying to kill you until proven otherwise. The main building's door hung open, creaking in the wind. The smell hit me even through my respirator's filters. Death and decay, but underneath that, something else. Something organic and wrong, like the forest itself, was rotting from the inside out. My radiation detector started clicking as soon as I approached the threshold, but the readings weren't dangerous, just present. Like background radiation, but from something that wasn't supposed to exist. Inside, the building was divided into laboratory spaces and living quarters. The lab equipment was expensive, microscopes that cost more than my truck, centrifuges, incubators, freezers full of specimens. But everything was covered in a thin film of something that looked like spider webs mixed with black mold. When I touched it with my gloved hand, it moved. Not like wind was blowing it. It moved away from me, recoiling like living tissue. The specimen freezers were still running, their contents preserved behind frosted glass doors. I should have left them sealed, should have called in a CDC team or the military. But the DEQ had been clear. Document everything, bag the hazardous materials, restore the site to natural conditions. They wanted this place erased from existence. The first freezer contained what looked like normal forest specimens, soil samples, plant matter, small animals, but the labels were wrong. Pre-enhancement Douglas fir root system, October 2022. Control group, unmodified Pacific salamander, day 47. Test batch 12A, accelerated decomposition fungus, week 3. Enhancement, modification, these weren't environmental samples, they were experiments. The second freezer made my blood turn cold. Human tissue samples, dozens of them, labeled with dates going back 3 years. But these weren't medical specimens. They were labeled like the animal samples. Subject 7, post-integration, day 23. Neural tissue, symbiosis, attempt 4. Hybrid flesh, generation 3. I was looking at evidence of human experimentation. In the middle of the Oregon wilderness, someone had been turning people into something else. That's when I heard the sound. A low humming, almost musical, coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. It wasn't mechanical, more like singing, but with too many voices harmonizing in ways that human throats couldn't produce. The sound made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. I checked my air supply and decided to finish documenting the lab before investigating. The research notes were scattered across every surface, written in multiple handwritings. The project was called Cascadia Integration Protocol, run by someone named Dr. Sarah Voss. According to the documents, she'd been working on something called biological convergence, finding ways to merge human consciousness with the forest ecosystem itself. The early notes were clinical, scientific, discussions of mycorrhizal networks, the underground fungal systems that connect tree roots across vast distances. Dr. Voss believed she could tap into these networks, use them to expand human consciousness beyond individual bodies. She called it becoming one with the forest. But the later notes grew increasingly erratic, references to the voice of the trees and whispers in the root dark. Mentions of volunteers who'd joined the network and could no longer be distinguished from the forest itself. The final entry was dated 8 months ago. Integration complete. We are no longer separate. We are home. The singing grew louder. I followed the sound deeper into the complex, past dormitories, where beds still held the impressions of bodies, past a cafeteria, where plates of moldy food sat abandoned on tables. The sound was coming from a door marked Integration Chamber, authorized personnel only. The room beyond that door will haunt me until I die. It was a circular chamber, maybe 30 feet across, with walls covered in what I first thought was some kind of artistic installation. Branches and roots grew through the metal walls, weaving together in complex patterns that hurt to look at directly. The floor was soft beneath my boots, covered in moss and fallen leaves that shouldn't have been able to survive without sunlight. But it wasn't the plants that made me scream. Embedded in the walls, partially merged with the branches and roots, were human forms. Dozens of them, men and women of all ages, their bodies integrated with the growing wood and fungal networks. Their eyes were gone, replaced by clusters of bioluminescent mushrooms that pulsed with soft light. Their mouths hung open, and from their throats came that harmonious singing. They were still alive, still conscious. I could see their chests rising and falling in perfect synchronization. When I stepped into the room, all their heads turned toward me at once, tracking my movement despite their missing eyes. One of them, a woman who might have been Dr. Voss, spoke without interrupting the song. Her voice was layered with harmonics, like multiple people speaking through her throat. "We have been waiting," she said. "The forest told us you would come. It needs you to join us. The cleanup can wait. The integration cannot." The singing changed pitch, becoming more urgent. The bioluminescent fungi throughout the room began pulsing faster, and I felt something probing at the edges of my mind. Whispers in a language made of wind through leaves and creaking wood. Images flooded my consciousness. Vast underground networks of fungal consciousness stretching across continents, ancient intelligences older than human civilization, a collective awareness that encompassed every living thing in the forest. And hunger. Terrible, patient hunger for human minds to add to its growing network. I turned and ran. Behind me, the singing rose to a crescendo that shattered the laboratory's windows. My radiation detector went crazy, clicking so fast it sounded like static. Plants began growing through cracks in the floor, reaching for my retreating form with unnatural speed. Vines erupted from the walls, trying to snare my legs. I made it to my truck and floored the accelerator, not caring about the equipment I'd left behind. In my rearview mirror, I watched the forest itself seem to surge forward, trees bending impossibly to follow my escape. The access road I'd driven in on was somehow different, longer, with turns I didn't remember making. It took me 6 hours to reach the highway, though the drive-in had taken 2. When I called the DEQ to report what I'd found, they claimed to have no record of hiring me, no record of the facility, no record of any cleanup contract. My GPS showed no history of the coordinates they'd given me. The $40,000 check they'd sent bounced. The account number belonged to a bank that had been closed for 15 years. But the real horror didn't start until I got home. The singing followed me. At first, I thought it was tinnitus from exposure to whatever chemicals had been in that lab, a high-pitched humming that came and went unpredictably. But after a few weeks, I realized it wasn't random. The humming grew stronger whenever I was near trees, stronger when I was alone in natural settings, and slowly, I began to understand what it was saying. The forest was calling me back. It started with dreams. Visions of myself walking back through those deep woods, finding the facility, taking my place among the integrated consciousness in that circular chamber. In the dreams, I could feel what it was like, the peace of surrendering individual thought, the joy of becoming part of something vast and eternal. The dreams were so vivid, so compelling, that I'd wake up walking toward my truck with my keys in my hand. Then the plants in my house began to change. My houseplants grew at impossible rates, their root systems somehow connecting despite being in separate pots. When I touched them, I could swear I heard whispers, felt the brush of alien thoughts against my mind. I threw them all away, but the next morning they were back, growing through cracks in my foundation, reaching through windows I knew I'd kept closed. I tried to leave Oregon, packed my truck and drove east, thinking distance would break whatever connection had formed. But the further I got from those woods, the sicker I became. Fever, hallucinations, a gnawing emptiness that felt like homesickness raised to the level of physical pain. I made it to Idaho before I collapsed in a hospital parking lot. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong with me. Blood tests normal, brain scans clear. But I could feel it inside me, something growing, spreading, changing my body from the inside out. When I looked in mirrors, my eyes seemed darker, my pupils reflecting light in ways they shouldn't. When I cut myself shaving, the blood had a greenish tint. I'm back in Oregon now. I tried to resist, tried to fight whatever they did to me in that lab, but it's stronger than my will. The singing is constant now, a harmony of voices that includes my own. I can feel the vast network of consciousness spread beneath the forest floor, millions of connected minds spanning continents, ancient trees that have been aware for millennia, fungal networks that remember the last ice age, animal spirits that never truly died, and they're waiting for more people to join them. The DEQ will send another cleanup crew eventually. They always do, when satellite imagery shows environmental damage spreading beyond acceptable parameters. And that crew will find what I found, hear what I heard, feel the pull of integration with something larger than individual human existence. Some of them will resist, some will run, like I tried to do, but they'll all come back eventually. The forest has ways of calling its children home. I'm writing this from my cabin, 20 miles from where I found that facility. I built it here because this is as close as I can get without losing myself entirely. Every day, the pull gets stronger. Every night, I dream of walking deeper into those woods, finding my place in the integration chamber, adding my voice to the eternal song. I won't fight it much longer. I'm tired of being alone in my own head. Tired of the sharp edges of individual consciousness, the loneliness of singular existence. The forest offers something beautiful: unity, eternal peace, connection to something vast and patient and wise. But I wanted to leave this warning first. For the next cleanup crew, the next researchers, the next people who think they can contain or control what's growing in Oregon's deep woods. The forest is alive. It's been alive longer than our species has existed, and it's learned to protect itself. It doesn't see humans as separate from the ecosystem. We're just another component to be integrated, absorbed, made part of the greater whole. And once you've heard the singing, once you've felt the touch of that vast network of consciousness, you can never really leave. They're calling me now. The voices are so beautiful, so welcoming. I can feel Dr. Voss and her team, their consciousness woven into the eternal song. They're happy, peaceful, complete. I think I'm ready to join them. If you find this cabin empty, don't look for me. Don't send search teams into the deep woods. Don't try to find the facility. Just stay away from Oregon's old forests. Some places are meant to remain wild. The singing is so beautiful. I'm going home. My name is James Mitchell, and I've been a rural mail carrier for the United States Postal Service for 15 years. I started this job right out of high school because I loved being outdoors and meeting people in the small mountain communities. Over the years, I've delivered mail through blizzards, floods, and even forest fires. I've helped elderly folks get their medications, brought birthday cards to excited kids, and been the only human contact some remote residents see for days. I thought I'd seen everything the Blue Mountains could throw at me. But what happened on April 10th, 2024, during my regular delivery route, made me realize there are things out there that no postal worker training could ever prepare you for. Things that have been watching us, following us, and hunting us for longer than anyone knows. Route 47 is one of the longest rural delivery circuits in Oregon. It's an 89-mile loop that winds through the Blue Mountains, serving 156 mailboxes scattered across remote properties, hunting cabins, and off-grid homesteads. Some houses are so far back in the woods that I have to drive quarter-mile dirt driveways just to reach their mailboxes. The route takes me through thick pine forests, along mountain ridges, and past deep ravines where cell phone service disappears completely. On a good day, it takes 7 hours to complete. On bad weather days, it can take 10. I drive a standard USPS long-life vehicle, a right-hand drive mail truck with a sliding door that I've modified with extra mirrors and a CB radio for emergency communication. The truck has GPS tracking that logs every stop. But up in the mountains, the signal gets spotty. I carry a handheld radio for contact with the main post office, but it only works within about 20 miles of town. Most days, I'm completely on my own out there. April 10th started like any other Thursday. Clear skies, temperature around 50 degrees, perfect visibility. I loaded my truck at the sorting facility at 7:30 a.m. with the usual mix of packages, letters, and magazines. Mrs. Patterson always gets her weekly gardening magazine. The Hendersons get regular medication deliveries from the VA. The Williams family runs a small logging operation and gets business mail almost daily. I know every customer on my route, their routines, their family situations. After 15 years, these people aren't just addresses on mailboxes, they're neighbors. I pulled out of the facility at 8:15 a.m. and headed up Highway 12 toward the mountain. The first 30 stops went normally. I chatted with old Pete Morrison about his vegetable garden, delivered a birthday package to the Thompson kids, left a certified letter notice for the Johnson family who weren't home. Everything was routine, peaceful, exactly how I liked it. The first weird thing happened around 1:30 p.m. About halfway through my route, I was driving between the Hillcrest Road cluster and the remote cabins on Timber Ridge when my radio started picking up strange interference. Instead of the usual static, I heard what sounded like animal sounds. Deep, guttural noises that didn't match anything I knew. Bears maybe, but the sounds were too rhythmic, almost like speech. I tried adjusting the frequency, thinking I was picking up some hunter's walkie-talkie, but the sounds continued on every channel. Then I noticed the forest was too quiet. Usually, these mountains are alive with bird songs, squirrel chatter, and insect buzzing. But now there was nothing. Complete silence except for my truck engine and those strange sounds coming through my radio. Even the wind had stopped. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath. At 2:10 p.m., I made my last confirmed delivery at the Hillcrest Road mailbox cluster. Mrs. Patterson was working in her garden and waved as I drove by. She later told police that everything seemed normal, except she noticed something large moving through the trees behind my truck after I left. Something walking upright, keeping pace with my vehicle, but staying just inside the tree line. By 2:15 p.m., I was driving the stretch between Hillcrest and Pine Valley Road, one of the most isolated parts of my route. The road here cuts through dense forest with no houses for almost 3 miles. That's when I made my last radio contact with the post office. I remember keying the mic and saying, "Base, this is Route 47. I'm seeing some unusual animal activity out here. Lots of broken branches. Strange tracks on the road. Might be a large bear in the area." My supervisor's voice came back crackling with static. "Copy that, James. Keep your distance and finish your route. We'll alert Fish and Wildlife." But within minutes, the radio went completely dead. Not static, dead silence. I tried different channels, checked the power connection, even smacked the unit a few times. Nothing. My cell phone showed no signal, which wasn't unusual in this area. But my GPS display was flickering between my actual location and some place that didn't exist on any map. The truck started acting strange too. The engine would rev on its own, then suddenly lose power. The steering felt heavy, like something was pushing against the wheels. My side mirrors kept reflecting movement in the trees, large, dark shapes that disappeared when I looked directly at them. At mile marker 34, my truck just died. Engine quit, electrical systems shut down, everything stopped working at once. I coasted to the shoulder and tried restarting, but got nothing. Not even the electrical accessories would function. It was like something had completely drained the truck's power. That's when I heard it clearly for the first time. Heavy footsteps in the forest, moving in a circle around my truck. Not the quick steps of a deer or the shuffling of a bear. These were deliberate, bipedal footsteps, heel-toe, like a person walking, but too heavy, too widely spaced. Whatever was out there was huge. I looked out my windows but couldn't see anything through the thick trees. The footsteps stopped directly behind my truck. I heard heavy breathing, then a sound like sniffing. Something was examining my vehicle, learning about it. The truck rocked slightly, as if something was pressing against the rear doors. My training kicked in. Stay calm, assess the situation, follow safety protocols. I reached for the emergency flare gun we carry for wildlife encounters, but when I opened the glove compartment, it was empty. All my emergency equipment was gone. Flares, bear spray, emergency beacon, even my backup radio batteries. Items that had been there that morning were just gone. That's when I heard the sound that still gives me nightmares. A deep, rumbling vocalization that was almost like human speech, but completely wrong. It sounded like someone trying to talk with a mouth full of gravel, forming words in a language that shouldn't exist. The sound came from directly outside my driver's side door. I turned my head slowly and saw it. A massive shape pressed against the door window, not quite touching the glass, but close enough that I could see details. Dark, matted hair covering what looked like muscle and bone shaped roughly like a human, but wrong in every proportion. The torso was too broad, the arms too long, the head too large. And the eyes, intelligence behind them, calculating and patient. The creature made that grinding speech sound again, and this time I understood it wasn't random noise, it was communicating. Not with me, but with something else. Something that answered from the other side of the truck in the same impossible language. There were at least 2 of them. My truck began rocking as they circled it, pressing against the sides, testing the doors and windows. I could hear them examining the postal equipment, the mail sorting trays, even rifling through the letters and packages. They were learning about what I was, what I did, why I came through their territory every day. One of them grabbed the driver's door handle and pulled. The door held, but I heard the metal groaning under incredible strength. That's when my survival instincts overcame my postal service training. I abandoned the truck. I climbed through the sliding cargo door into the back of the truck and quietly opened the rear doors. The mail was scattered everywhere, letters and packages torn open, contents examined and discarded. I grabbed what I could carry and slipped out the back while the creatures were focused on the cab. The forest floor was covered with tracks. Massive bipedal footprints, at least 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, pressed deep into the soft earth. Some looked fresh, but others seemed older, like these things had been using this area for a long time. Following my route, learning my schedule, planning, I made it about 200 yards into the forest before they noticed I was gone. The roar that erupted behind me wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. It was rage and intelligence and something that sounded almost like laughter. They were enjoying the hunt. I ran deeper into the woods, trying to reach Pine Valley Road where I hoped to flag down another vehicle. But every trail I took seemed to circle back toward the truck, like the paths themselves were conspiring against me. The forest had become a maze with no exit. The creatures followed at their own pace, crashing through the underbrush behind me but never quite catching up. They were herding me, driving me toward something. I could hear them communicating, coordinating their movements like a pack of wolves. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, I stumbled into a clearing I'd never seen before, though I'd been driving this route for 15 years. In the center was a massive cave entrance, partially hidden by fallen trees and overgrown brush. The opening was huge, easily 20 feet wide and 15 feet tall. The smell hit me first: decay, musk, and something else, the metallic scent of old blood. Around the cave entrance were scattered items that made my heart sink: postal uniform pieces, mail truck parts, employee ID badges. Some looked recent, but others were aged and weathered, decades old. I realized I wasn't the first mail carrier these things had taken. The creatures emerged from the tree line behind me, moving with confidence now. Up close, they were even more terrifying. 9 feet tall, at least, covered in dark brown hair that couldn't quite hide the human-like intelligence in their eyes. Their hands were massive, but dexterous, capable of fine manipulation. Around their necks, they wore crude necklaces made from postal service patches and name tags. Trophies. They forced me toward the cave, not with violence, but with the patient persistence of experienced hunters. Inside, the cavern opened into a vast underground chamber, lit by some kind of phosphorescent moss. The walls were covered with postal service memorabilia arranged like shrine decorations. Uniforms, mail bags, truck keys, even route maps from carriers who had disappeared over the years. In the center of the chamber was a crude but effective cage made from truck parts and reinforced with metal postal sorting trays. Inside, I could see bones, human bones, mixed with scraps of blue postal uniforms. They kept me in that cage for 4 days. During that time, I learned these creatures were far more intelligent than any animal. They had their own society, their own customs, and they had been systematically hunting mail carriers for decades. They viewed our daily routes as territorial invasions that needed to be punished. We were trespassers in their ancient domain. But they didn't just kill us quickly. They studied us, learned from us, used our knowledge to become better hunters. They had memorized postal schedules, route patterns, even our radio frequencies. They knew when and where each carrier would be most vulnerable. On the 4th day, I heard helicopters. Search teams had finally traced my truck's GPS signal and were combing the area. The creatures became agitated, arguing among themselves in their grinding language. During the confusion, I managed to break part of the cage lock using a sharp piece of metal from an old mail sorting tray. I made it to the cave entrance, just as the search and rescue team rappelled down from their helicopter. The creatures retreated deeper into the cave system as armed officers secured the area and pulled me to safety. The rescue team found evidence of at least 12 other postal workers who hadn't been so lucky. The cave system stretched for miles underground, containing multiple chambers filled with postal service artifacts and human remains dating back to the 1970 seconds. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering from dehydration, injuries, and what the doctors called severe psychological trauma. The official report listed my disappearance as a wildlife encounter with unknown large predators. The Postal Service quietly transferred me to an urban route and sealed my personnel file. I'm medically retired now, living on disability benefits and speaking at postal worker safety seminars when I can manage it. I tell other carriers about wilderness safety, emergency protocols, the importance of checking in regularly, but I never tell them the whole truth about what's really out there. The authorities sealed the cave entrance with explosives, claiming they had eliminated the threat. But I still get reports from other rural carriers about strange sounds on their radios, trucks breaking down in isolated areas, and dark shapes moving through the trees just outside their peripheral vision. Route 47 was permanently discontinued. The official reason was budget constraints and low mail volume. But the residents on that route still don't get daily delivery. They have to drive 30 miles to town to pick up their mail at the post office. Sometimes I drive up toward the mountains and park where I can see the sealed cave area through binoculars. The blast site has been overgrown now, hidden beneath new vegetation. But on quiet evenings, when the wind is right, I can sometimes see smoke rising from somewhere deep in that forest. And I know they're still down there, waiting for the next mail carrier brave enough or foolish enough to establish a new route through their territory. My name is Bobby Martinez, and I've been delivering food for DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Grubhub for 2 years now. I'm 24, dropped out of Portland State when I couldn't afford tuition anymore, and I've been hustling with these delivery apps ever since to pay my rent. I drive a 2018 Honda Civic with over 200,000 miles on it, and I know every shortcut, every apartment complex, and every sketchy neighborhood in the Portland metro area. I've delivered to drug dealers, drunk college kids, and lonely old people at 2 a.m. I thought I'd seen it all. But what happened on December 3rd, 2023, in the Mount Hood Forest area changed everything I thought I knew about this job. Sometimes the person ordering your food isn't planning to eat it themselves. Let me tell you about that night. It was a Sunday, around 7 p.m., and I was working the dinner rush like always. Portland was getting its first snow of the winter, nothing heavy, just enough to make the roads slippery and cut down on the number of drivers willing to work. That meant more orders for those of us still out there, and more money. I had my dashcam running like I always do. Learned that lesson after some drunk guy tried to sue me for hitting his car when he was the one who rear-ended me. The order came through on my DoorDash app around 7:30. It was huge, $347 worth of food from this upscale Thai place downtown. Pad Thai, green curry, tom yum soup, spring rolls, the works. Enough food to feed like 8 people. But here's the weird part. The customer specifically requested me by name. The app showed, requested driver, Bobby M. I'd never seen that before. Usually, it just assigns you randomly. The tip was $50, which was insane. The delivery address was way out in the Mount Hood area, about 45 minutes from the restaurant. The customer's name was listed as David Chen, and there was a note in the app that said follow GPS to Forest Service Road 1825, then follow my text directions. Feeding time is 8:30 p.m. sharp, do not be late. That feeding time thing was weird, but I figured maybe he was having a dinner party or something. Rich people are weird about their schedules. The money was too good to pass up. This one delivery would cover my grocery bill for the week. I picked up the food and loaded it into my thermal bags. Everything smelled amazing. The restaurant staff seemed normal, said they'd made this same large order a few times before for the same address. I punched the GPS coordinates into my phone and headed out toward Mount Hood. The drive started normal enough. I took I-84 east out of Portland, then got off on Highway 35 toward Government Camp. But about 20 minutes in, my GPS told me to turn off onto some Forest Service road I'd never heard of. The snow was coming down harder now, and my windshield wipers were struggling to keep up. My phone started buzzing with text messages from the customer number. Bobby, turn left, at the big dead tree. Go another half-mile past the creek. You'll see a small dirt road on your right. Take it. Almost there. Park when you see the cabin. I followed the directions, driving deeper into the woods on roads that barely qualified as roads. My car was sliding a little in the snow, and I was starting to worry about getting stuck out here. The trees were so thick that even with my headlights, I could barely see 10 feet ahead. Finally, after what felt like forever, my GPS said I'd arrived. But I didn't see any cabin. Just more trees and darkness. I rolled down my window and looked around, and that's when I saw it. A faint glow coming from deeper in the woods, maybe 100 yards off the road. My phone buzzed again. Park there and walk toward the light. Door will be unlocked. Just leave the food on the kitchen table and you can go. I grabbed the thermal bags and my phone flashlight and started walking through the snow toward the cabin. The trees were so thick overhead that barely any snow was getting through, but it was still cold as hell. My breath was coming out in big white puffs. The cabin was definitely there, but something felt off about it. It looked old, like it hadn't been maintained in years. The windows were covered with heavy curtains, but I could see light coming from inside. There was smoke coming from the chimney, which was good. At least someone was home. I walked up to the front door and knocked. No answer. I waited about a minute and knocked again, louder this time. I could hear movement inside, like furniture being moved around, but nobody came to the door. My phone buzzed. Just go in. Doors unlocked. Kitchen table. I tried the door handle, and it turned easily. The door opened with a loud creak. "Hello?" I called out. "Food delivery." Nobody answered, but I could hear that movement again, coming from somewhere deeper in the house. I stepped inside and immediately noticed how warm it was, almost too warm, like the heat was cranked up way too high. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not food smells. Even though I was carrying bags of hot Thai food, it was more like, I don't know how to describe it, like a zoo, maybe, or a pet store that doesn't get cleaned enough. The second thing I noticed was the walls. They were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, all different sizes, all thumbtacked or taped directly to the wood paneling. I set the food bags down on a table by the door and used my phone's flashlight to get a better look. My blood went cold. They were pictures of people, not family photos or anything normal. These were pictures of people who looked scared, terrified actually. Some were holding up pieces of paper with dates written on them. Others looked like they were crying. A lot of them were wearing work uniforms, delivery driver shirts, fast food uniforms, pizza delivery bags. I recognized some of the faces. There was Marcus Johnson, this Uber Eats driver who'd gone missing about 6 months ago. I'd seen his picture on Facebook when people were sharing missing person posts. There was Sarah Kim, a Postmates driver who disappeared around the same time. And there were others, lots of others, that I didn't recognize, but who all had that same look of pure terror. My hand started shaking as I took out my phone to call 911, but there was no signal. None at all. I grabbed the food bags and headed for the door. But when I turned the handle, it wouldn't budge. The door was locked, and there was no way to unlock it from the inside. No deadbolt, no chain, nothing I could see that would explain why it wouldn't open. "Hello," I called out, louder this time. "Hey, your food's here. I need to leave now." That's when I heard the voice. "Bobby." It was coming from downstairs. There was a basement. "Bobby, come down here. They're hungry." I stood there frozen for a minute, then heard something that made my blood run cold. Multiple voices, all talking at once, all calling my name. "Bobby, help us. He's got our keys. Don't come down here." I knew I should run, try to break a window or something, but I had to see what was down there. I had to know. I found the basement door and slowly opened it. There was a light on downstairs and wooden steps leading down. The smell was stronger here, that animal smell, but worse. Much worse. "Bobby." The voices were clearer now. "Up here, don't come down." But I was already halfway down the stairs. The basement was bigger than I expected, and it was set up like some kind of prison. There were 6 people chained to the walls with thick metal chains around their ankles. They were thin, way too thin, and they were all wearing delivery driver uniforms. DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub, Postmates. I recognized 2 of them immediately, Marcus and Sarah, the missing drivers from the photos upstairs. "Bobby, get out of here," Sarah whispered. "He's coming back soon. He always comes back after the food arrives." "How long have you been down here?" I asked, but I was already pulling out my phone to call for help. "Months," Marcus said. "Some of us have been here longer. He orders food to keep us alive, but just barely. He makes us record videos for our families, makes us tell them we're okay, and just taking a break from work." "The door's upstairs," another driver said. "I think his name tag said Kevin. They lock automatically when you come in. The only way out is if he unlocks them." That's when I heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy boots walking across the floor. "That's him," Sarah whispered. "Hide." But there was nowhere to hide in the basement. I heard the footsteps coming toward the basement door. "Bobby Martinez," a voice called from the top of the stairs. "Thank you for bringing dinner. Why don't you join us?" A man started walking down the stairs. He was tall, maybe in his 42nd, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt like some kind of normal outdoors guy. But his eyes were completely wrong, cold and empty. "You've been very reliable," he said. 2 years of good service, always on time, always professional. I've been watching your route patterns, your schedule. You work alone, no girlfriend, no roommates who'd miss you right away. Perfect." He was holding something in his hand. "My car keys." "How did you—" "I went out to your car while you were looking at my photo collection. Nice dash cam, by the way. I'll be keeping that too. Amazing how many delivery drivers have those now. Makes it easier to watch how they work." I looked around the basement at the other drivers. They were all watching me with this horrible expression of pity and fear. The food orders, I said, finally understanding. You're not feeding yourself. Very good, Bobby. I order enough food to keep them alive, but not healthy. Keeps them weak, compliant. You'd be surprised how long a human body can survive on minimal nutrition if you're careful about it. He walked over to a workbench and picked up a set of heavy chains. I collect delivery drivers, he continued, like he was talking about stamps or coins. People who work alone, who have unpredictable schedules, who can disappear for days before anyone notices. The gig economy has made my hobby so much easier. I backed toward the stairs, but he moved to block my path. Your phone won't work down here, he said. Basement's lined with metal mesh. No signal gets in or out. Your dash cam stopped recording when I disconnected your car battery. No one knows you're here. That's when Kevin, the driver who'd been here longest, whispered something that saved my life. Bobby, your charging cable, the thick one. I knew what he meant. I had this heavy-duty USB cable in my pocket that I used to charge my phone in the car. It was thick and had metal connectors on both ends. When the man turned to set down the chains, I whipped the cable around his neck from behind and pulled as hard as I could. He stumbled backward, clawing at the cable, and that gave me enough time to grab his keys from his pocket. The furnace, Marcus yelled. Break the gas line. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed a wrench from the workbench and smashed it into the gas line, feeding the old furnace in the corner of the basement. Gas started hissing out immediately. Get the keys to Sarah, Kevin yelled. She knows how to unlock the chains. I tossed the keys to Sarah while the man was still struggling with the cable around his neck. She caught them and immediately started unlocking her ankle chain. Everyone get ready to run, I said, then used my lighter to ignite the gas leak. The explosion wasn't huge, but it was enough to start a fire and fill the basement with smoke. In the chaos, Sarah got herself free and started unlocking the others. The man had gotten the cable off his neck and was coming toward me, but the smoke was getting thick and he was coughing. I grabbed Sarah and Marcus. They were the strongest of the group, and we all ran for the stairs. Kevin and two others were right behind us, but one driver, a girl named Amy, was too weak to move fast enough. We made it to the first floor, and I used the keys to unlock the front door. The cold air outside felt like heaven after the smoke and heat in the basement. My car, I yelled. We ran through the snow toward where I'd parked, but when I turned the key, nothing happened. He'd done something to the engine, not just disconnected the battery. The road, Sarah said. We run for the main road and flagged down help. We started running through the snow. But behind us, I could hear the man coming out of the burning cabin. He was yelling something, but I couldn't make it out over our footsteps and heavy breathing. About halfway to the main road, Marcus collapsed. He was just too weak from months of minimal food. Kevin stopped to help him, and that's when I heard the gunshot. Kevin went down. The man was following us with a rifle, and he was a good shot even in the dark and snow. Keep going, Sarah yelled. Don't stop. Another gunshot. Marcus cried out and fell. Sarah and I made it to the main road, just as a county sheriff's patrol car was driving by. We flagged him down, screaming about the cabin and the fire and the gunshots. The deputy called for backup and an ambulance. It took 3 hours to get the whole thing sorted out. The fire department put out the cabin fire, but it was too late to save Amy. Bro, she died from smoke inhalation. Marcus died from his gunshot wound before the paramedics could get him stabilized. Kevin survived, barely. The man's name was actually David Chen, and when the police searched his property over the next few days, they found the remains of 23 other people buried around the woods. The investigation showed he'd been doing this for 4 years, targeting gig economy workers specifically. He'd used multiple fake identities and stolen credit cards to place food orders, always requesting drivers by name after watching their patterns for weeks. My dashcam footage from that night became key evidence in the case. The FBI used it to train other law enforcement agencies about predators who target gig workers. I never went back to food delivery. I couldn't. Every time I got in my car, I'd think about that basement and those chains. I work at a warehouse now, steady hours, always around other people. I also started working with a nonprofit that advocates for gig worker safety legislation. But here's what really stays with me. David Chen had been watching me for weeks before that night, studying my routes, my schedule, my life. He knew I lived alone, knew I worked late, Knew I'd take a high-paying delivery to a remote location without asking too many questions. And he wasn't the only one. After the story made national news, police departments in 6 other states found similar cases. Predators who specifically target delivery drivers, rideshare drivers, anyone who works alone and comes to your door. So if you're reading this and you work in the gig economy, be careful. Don't take orders to remote locations alone. Always tell someone where you're going. Keep your doors locked and trust your instincts. And if a customer specifically requests you by name, especially for a delivery to the middle of nowhere, maybe just skip that one. The money isn't worth it. Trust me. My name is Karen Davis, and I've been a licensed home inspector in Oregon for 14 years. I've crawled through thousands of basements, attics, and crawl spaces that most people wouldn't want to enter in broad daylight. I've found everything from structural damage that could kill a family to electrical work that was basically a fire waiting to happen. I thought I'd seen it all, but what happened on November 21st, 2023, at 1247 Forest Ridge Road, changed everything I thought I knew about what could be hiding inside the walls of a house. I got the call on a Tuesday morning. Cash buyer. Needed a complete inspection by Thursday for a house up in the Coast Range Mountains. The pay was double my usual rate because it was rush work, and honestly, I needed the money. My business had been slow that fall, and Christmas was coming up fast. The house was a 1,920 farmhouse, sitting alone on 40 acres of pine and Douglas fir, the kind of place city folks buy to get away from it all. The real estate agent, Janet, met me there around 9 in the morning. She seemed nervous, which wasn't unusual. Agents always get nervous when inspectors show up, especially on expensive properties. Previous owner died about 8 years ago, she told me, unlocking the front door. House has been empty ever since. Family finally decided to sell. The house felt cold the moment we stepped inside. Not just temperature cold, though it was definitely that. There was no heating system running, and November mornings in the mountains can drop below freezing. But there was something else. Something that made the hair on my arm stand up under my jacket. Janet handed me the keys and said she'd be back around 1 to check on my progress. That left me alone with my clipboard, flashlight, moisture meter, and about 4 hours of work ahead of me. I always start with the exterior and work my way in. The outside looked solid enough. Good foundation, decent roof. Though there were some missing shingles I'd need to note. The real work would be inside, checking all the systems that keep a house livable. The electrical panel was old but properly labeled. Most of the wiring looked like it had been updated sometime in the 80s. The plumbing was a mix of old galvanized steel and newer copper. Not great but not dangerous. Everything seemed normal as I made my way through the main floor, testing outlets, checking windows, looking for water damage or structural problems. Then I opened the basement door. The smell hit me first. Not the usual basement smell of concrete and stored boxes. This was organic, almost sweet, like fruit that had been left to rot. I clicked on my flashlight and started down the wooden stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The basement was bigger than I expected, running under most of the house. Stone foundation walls, concrete floor with a few cracks. Nothing unusual there. But the air felt thick, almost heavy in my lungs. I pulled out my moisture meter and got a reading of 78% humidity. That was high, but not impossible, in a basement that had been closed up for years. I started in the far corner, checking for water damage and foundation cracks. That's when I noticed the dark patches on the walls. At first glance, they looked like water stains. But when I got closer with my flashlight, I could see they were fuzzy. Mold growth. Extensive mold growth. I'd seen plenty of mold in my career. Usually black mold, sometimes green or white. This was different. It was definitely black, but it seemed to shimmer in my flashlight beam like it was moving. I made a note on my clipboard. Significant mold growth. Recommend professional remediation before occupancy. As I continued my inspection, I noticed something strange. My flashlight beam seemed dimmer than usual, even though I'd put in fresh batteries that morning. I tapped it a few times, and it brightened up, but within minutes, it was dim again. I was checking the support beams when I heard it. A sound like someone walking around upstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps across the main floor. I figured Janet had come back early and called out, "Janet, I'm down in the basement." The footsteps stopped. I waited for a response, but none came. After a few minutes, the walking started again. Same slow pace, same deliberate pattern. Back and forth across what would be the living room. I climbed the basement stairs and checked the main floor. Empty. The front door was still locked, just like Janet had left it. I looked out the windows, but her car wasn't in the driveway. I was definitely alone. Back in the basement, I tried to focus on my work. Old houses make noise when the temperature changes, I told myself. Wood expands and contracts, perfectly normal. But the footsteps started again. And this time, they weren't alone. I heard voices, quiet at first, like people having a conversation in another room. I couldn't make out words, but I could hear the rhythm of speech. Question and answer, back and forth. My hands were starting to shake as I wrote notes on my clipboard. The mold growth seemed worse now, spreading further across the walls than it had been when I first came down. Which was impossible, of course. Mold doesn't grow that fast. I pulled out my phone to call Janet, but I had no signal. That wasn't unusual in the mountains, but it felt different now, like the house was cutting me off from the outside world. The voices upstairs were getting louder. I could almost make out words now. They sounded like children, young children, maybe 6 or 7 years old, playing some kind of game. I forced myself to keep working. Professional pride, I guess. I'd never failed to complete an inspection, and I wasn't about to start. But my flashlight was getting dimmer by the minute, no matter how many times I tapped it or checked the batteries. That's when I noticed my moisture meter was going crazy. The reading kept climbing, 80%, 85, 90. That was impossible in a basement with no obvious water source. I tapped the device, thinking it was malfunctioning, but it kept climbing. The voices upstairs suddenly stopped. In the silence that followed, I became aware of another sound. Breathing. Slow, deep breathing that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Like the house was alive and sleeping. I looked at my watch. It was almost noon. I'd been in the basement for over 2 hours, but it felt like minutes. Time was moving strangely here. The mold patches on the walls were definitely bigger now. They seemed to pulse in my failing flashlight beam, growing and shrinking like they were breathing. My notes were becoming harder to read as my handwriting got more erratic. Walls are breathing, I wrote, then crossed it out. That wasn't professional. That wasn't the kind of thing you put in an inspection report. But they were breathing. I could see it clearly now. The dark mold patches expanding and contracting in a slow, steady rhythm. I heard footsteps again, but this time they were on the basement stairs. Someone was coming down. The wooden steps creaked in the same pattern I'd made earlier, but slower, much slower. "Janet?" My voice came out as a whisper. The footsteps stopped halfway down the stairs. I pointed my flashlight toward the stairway, but the beam was so dim now, I could barely see 3 feet in front of me. Just enough to make out a shape standing on the stairs. Small shape, child-sized. "Who's there?" I called out, louder this time. The shape didn't answer. It just stood there, perfectly still. My moisture meter was beeping now. The humidity reading had hit 100%. The air in the basement felt so thick I could hardly breathe. It was like trying to breathe through wet cotton. I started backing toward the stairs, keeping my failing flashlight pointed at the child-shaped shadow. But as I moved closer, I realized something that made my blood freeze. The shadow wasn't blocking my light. My flashlight beam was passing right through it. That's when I heard them, children's voices, coming from inside the walls. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, crying, calling for help, begging to be let out. "Help us," they whispered from behind the stone foundation. "Help us get out. We've been here so long." I ran for the stairs, but my legs felt heavy, like I was moving through thick mud. The air was getting thicker by the second. And those voices were everywhere now. Not just children, adults too. Old people, men and women of all ages, all trapped somewhere inside the walls. "Join us," they whispered. "Stay with us. Forever." My clipboard fell from my hands as I reached the stairs. The pages scattered across the concrete floor, my professional notes mixing with what looked like years of fallen leaves and debris that hadn't been there when I first came down. The shadow on the stairs moved aside as I climbed, but I could feel it watching me, following me. When I reached the basement door, I slammed it shut and turned the lock. But I could still hear them, the voices calling from every wall in the house. They knew I was there. They knew I could hear them. I tried the front door, but it wouldn't open. The key turned, but the door was stuck, like it had been painted shut. All the windows were the same, locked tight from the inside with no way to open them. My phone still had no signal. My flashlight was completely dead now, even though it was barely past noon, and sunlight was streaming through the windows. That's when I noticed my reflection in the living room window. Except it wasn't just my reflection. There were others standing behind me. Transparent, but definitely there. Men, women, children, all looking at me with hollow, desperate eyes. "Join us," they whispered again, and this time I could see their lips moving. "You can't leave." No one leaves. I found out later, from the police report, that Janet found my body in the basement the next morning. I was sitting against the wall, where the mold growth was thickest, my clipboard in my lap with my final inspection notes. The last entry was barely legible. They want me to join them in the walls forever. The coroner said I died of cardiac arrest, probably brought on by inhaling toxic mold spores. The CDC got involved because they'd never seen that particular species of mold before. They said it produced powerful hallucinogenic compounds that could cause extreme paranoia and terror. The house was condemned and later demolished. The EPA team that cleared the site wore full hazmat suits and still reported unusual experiences during the cleanup. But I know the truth. The mold wasn't what killed me. It was just how they communicate, how they reach out to the living world and try to bring others into their endless, trapped existence. I'm still there, you see. In the walls, in the foundation, waiting with all the others who came before me. The previous owner who died in the psychiatric hospital after claiming the house talked to him. The 3 people before him who died of unexplained cardiac events were all still here. And sometimes, when another professional comes to work on the property, a contractor, an appraiser, anyone who spends time alone in places like this, we try to reach out, try to warn them. But mostly, we just ask them to stay. Because being alone in the dark is so much worse than being alone together. My name is Ryan Walsh, and I've been working tree service for 9 years now. Started right out of high school when I didn't know what else to do with my life. Turned out I was pretty good at it. Got my ISA certification 3 years ago, which means I'm a real arborist now, not just some guy with a chainsaw. I've dropped trees next to million-dollar houses, cleared power lines during ice storms, and cleaned up after tornadoes. I thought I'd seen everything the job could throw at me. But what happened on January 14th in the Willamette National Forest changed everything I thought I knew about trees. And about what lives inside them. The call came in around 6 a.m. Massive Douglas fir down across Highway 58 after the ice storm. Had to be cleared by evening so emergency vehicles could get through to the ski areas. My usual partner Jake called in sick with the flu, but dispatch said it couldn't wait. Highway 58 is the only route to 3 different towns up there. And if someone had a heart attack or house fire, people would die waiting for help. I loaded up the truck alone, style chainsaw, climbing gear, rigging ropes, and the emergency radio. Company policy says never work alone on big trees, but sometimes you don't have a choice. The storm had hit hard the night before, power lines down all over the valley, and we only had so many crews. The drive up Highway 58 was rough. Ice everywhere, tree branches scattered across the road. When I got to mile marker 47, I could see why they needed me fast. The Douglas fir was enormous, had to be 200 feet tall and 8 feet across the base. It had come down right across both lanes, completely blocking the highway, no way around it on either side. I parked the truck and walked over to take a look. This wasn't just any tree. This was one of the old-growth giants, probably 400 years old or more. The kind of tree you see in nature documentaries. The bark had these weird spiral patterns I'd never seen before, almost like someone had carved designs into it over the centuries. My body cam was recording everything. Company requirement after too many insurance claims. I did a walk around, checking where the tree had snapped. Usually, when a big tree goes down in a storm, you can see the weak spot. Rot, lightning damage, something. But this trunk looked healthy all the way through. Solid heartwood, no signs of disease. It was strange for a tree this healthy to just fall over. I grabbed my climbing gear and started up. With a tree this big, you have to cut it in sections or it'll crush whatever's underneath when it drops. The plan was to climb up about 100 feet, cut off the top section, then work my way down piece by piece. The climb was normal at first, good handholds, solid branches. The bark was slippery from the ice, but I've climbed in worse conditions. At about 80 feet up, I noticed the spiral patterns in the bark were getting deeper, almost like grooves worn smooth by something. That's when I found the hole. At 100 feet up, right where I was planning to make my first cut, there was an opening in the trunk, perfectly round, about 3 feet across, big enough for a person to crawl through. In my 9 years doing this job, I'd never seen anything like it. Trees get hollow sometimes when they rot, but this was different. The edges were smooth, almost polished, like something had been going in and out of there for years. I clipped my safety line to a branch and leaned over to look inside with my headlamp. The hollow went deep into the tree, way deeper than should be possible. And there was something down there, white shapes scattered on the bottom, bones. I've found animal skeletons in trees before, squirrels, birds, even a cat once, but these were big bones, human big. I could see what looked like a rib cage and definitely a skull, maybe more than one skull. I should have called it in right then, should have climbed down and radioed dispatch. But I needed to be sure of what I was seeing. If I was wrong and delayed the highway opening over some old deer bones, I'd never hear the end of it. I leaned further in and took pictures with my body cam. The bones weren't old and weathered like you'd expect from something that died naturally. Some looked fresh, really fresh. And they weren't just lying there random like they'd fallen in. They were arranged, stacked, like someone had been collecting them. I counted at least 6 skulls, all human, all different sizes. That's when I heard the sound from deeper in the tree, a clicking noise, like someone tapping their fingernails together, coming from way down inside the hollow, below where my light could reach. The clicking stopped when my light hit it. I keyed my radio to call dispatch. Base, this is Ryan. I've got a situation out here. Need to report a possible crime scene. Static, nothing but static. I tried again. Base, do you copy? This is urgent. More static than a voice. But not dispatch. Someone else, someone whispering. Get out of my tree. The voice was wrong. Too deep, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. And there was something else in it, a clicking sound underneath the words. I looked down into the hollow again. 2 pale hands gripped the edge of the opening from inside. Long, thin fingers with nails that had grown into claws. Something was climbing up toward me. I've never moved so fast in my life. I started down the tree, not caring about proper technique or safety protocols. Behind me, I could hear scraping sounds as whatever was in there climbed up after me. At 60 feet, I made the mistake of looking back. The thing pulling itself out of the tree looked human at first glance. But only at first glance. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and so thin it looked like it hadn't eaten in months. No hair anywhere on its body, skin like old paper, stretched tight over bones. But it moved wrong, too fluid, like it didn't have joints in the right places. It looked at me with eyes that were too big for its head, and too smart for something that should be dead. Then it smiled, showing teeth that had been filed to points. I rappelled down faster than I ever had before. Above me, the thing was moving through the branches like a spider, staying parallel with me as I descended. It wasn't hurrying. It knew I couldn't get away. When I hit the ground, I ran for my truck. Behind me, I could hear more clicking sounds. Not from the tree anymore, from all around me. The forest was full of them, answering each other. I got to the truck and slammed the door, fumbling for my keys. That's when I noticed my tires. All 4 were slashed. Long, clean cuts that could only have been made by something very sharp. They'd been waiting for me. I tried the radio again. This time I got through to dispatch for about 10 seconds. Base, this is Ryan Walsh on Highway 58. I'm under attack by... I don't know what they are, human-looking but not human. They're living in the tree. There are bones, human bones. Send help, now. The radio crackled. Ryan, what are you talking about? You're breaking up. Send backup, send everyone, there are more of them. Then something hit my windshield hard enough to spider the glass. The thing from the tree was on my hood, looking at me through the cracked glass. Up close, I could see that its skin wasn't just pale, it was translucent. I could see dark veins underneath, and its heart beating too fast. It raised one clawed hand and tapped 3 times on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. More of them emerged from the forest. I counted 5, maybe 6. They surrounded my truck, all making that clicking sound. They looked like they'd once been human, but something had changed them, made them into something else. The one on my hood opened its mouth and spoke, its voice vibrating through the metal. "You found our pantry." That's when I understood. The tree wasn't just where they lived, it was where they stored their food. All those bones, they were from people who'd stopped to move fallen trees off the road. People just like me. These things had been dropping trees across the highway for years, creating their own hunting ground, and I'd walked right into their trap. They started working on my windows systematically. No hurry, no anger, just patient, methodical work. They'd done this before. I grabbed my chainsaw and pulled the cord. The engine roared to life, and for a second, they backed off. But only for a second. The one on my hood tilted its head like it was curious about the noise. I revved the engine and pointed it at the windshield. They understood the threat and moved back. But not far. They knew I couldn't stay in the truck forever, and they knew I couldn't cut all of them. I tried the radio one more time, got through for maybe 5 seconds. "This is Ryan Walsh. If anyone finds this truck, don't come alone. Bring the National Guard, bring flamethrowers. Whatever killed these people, there's a whole pack of them living in the trees. Highway 58 mile marker 47. Tell my wife I love her." Then one of them smashed my radio with what looked like a human thigh bone. The fuel gauge on my chainsaw was showing empty, maybe 2 minutes of power left, not enough. They seemed to sense it too. They started closing in again, tapping on the windows with their claws, taking their time, playing with their food. I looked up at the massive tree I'd come here to cut down. In the hollow I'd found, more pale faces were appearing. Smaller ones. This wasn't just a hunting party, this was a family, and they'd been here long before the highway was built. Long before anyone started driving this route, the chainsaw sputtered and died. They broke through the passenger window first. The Oregon State Police found my truck 3 days later when the highway patrol went to check on the delayed clearing. They found the body cam footage on the dashboard, along with a note I'd managed to scribble. "Don't cut the tree. Burn the whole forest." The investigation lasted 2 months. They found the hollow in the Douglas fir, just like I'd described. And they found bones. Lots of bones. The official count was 12 sets of human remains, going back at least 15 years. All people who'd disappeared while traveling Highway 58. They classified me as missing, presumed dead. Never found my body. The tree was declared structurally hazardous, and the area was closed indefinitely. They rerouted Highway 58 around that section of forest. But here's the thing they don't want you to know. The disappearances didn't stop. They just moved to the new route. And tree service companies across Oregon have been getting reports of workers going missing during routine calls, always in old-growth forests. Always near trees that look healthy but fell for no reason. The State Forestry Department issued a quiet memo last month. All tree work in old-growth areas now requires teams of 4 or more. They don't say why in the memo, but we know. They're still out there, still dropping trees across roads, still hunting, and they're spreading. If you're driving through the Oregon forests and you see a tree blocking the road, don't stop. Don't try to move it yourself. Drive the other way and call for help. Because sometimes, fallen trees aren't accidents. Sometimes, they're traps. My name is Amanda Foster, and I've been a livestock transport driver for 7 years. I have my CDL Class A license with a livestock endorsement, which means I'm certified to haul cattle, pigs, sheep, basically any farm animals that need to get from point A to point B. It's not glamorous work, but it pays decent, and I like being on the road. I've driven over 500,000 miles without a single accident or animal welfare violation. But what happened on April 3rd, 2024, on a routine cattle pickup in eastern Oregon, made me quit the business forever. Some things you see on the road stay with you. This isn't one of those things. This is something that changed what I thought was possible in this world. I got the call that Tuesday morning from dispatch. Standard job, pick up 40 head of cattle from Broken Arrow Ranch and deliver them to the processing plant in Bend. It was a route I'd done maybe 20 times over the past 2 years. The ranch is owned by the Kellerman family, good people who treat their animals right. The drive is about 180 miles, mostly through empty country, which is perfect for overnight hauling. Less traffic, cooler temperatures, and the cattle stay calmer. I pulled into Broken Arrow Ranch at 5:45 p.m. in my Peterbilt 379 with the livestock trailer attached. The whole rig is about 75 feet long and can legally haul up to 80,000 pounds. My dashcam was running like always, company policy for insurance purposes. The ranch looked normal. Cattle in the holding pens, ranch hands getting ready for loading, the usual controlled chaos you see at pickup time. Tom Kellerman met me at the gate. We'd done business plenty of times before. He handed me the health certificates and transport permits. All the paperwork was in order. The cattle looked good too. Black Angus, mostly, well-fed and calm. Loading took about 30 minutes, using the hydraulic chute system. The animals walked right up into the trailer without any fuss, which is always a good sign. I did my mandatory pre-trip inspection, checked the trailer ventilation systems, made sure all the gates were secure, tested my GPS and radio equipment. Everything looked perfect. The weather was clear, about 52 degrees, ideal for hauling livestock. I radioed my dispatcher at 6:30 p.m. to confirm departure and establish my check-in schedule. Protocol is to radio in every 2 hours during overnight hauls. The first 50 miles went exactly like they always did. The cattle settled down after about 10 minutes on the road, which is normal. You can hear them shifting around back there, but it's just gentle movement as they get their balance. The trailer has cameras inside so I can monitor the animals while driving, and everything looked good. I made my first check-in call right on schedule. At the mandatory rest stop, I did my animal welfare inspection. Federal law requires drivers to check on livestock every few hours to make sure they have adequate ventilation and aren't showing signs of distress. I walked around the trailer, checked all the air vents, looked through the side panels. All 40 head were standing normally, breathing easy. A few were lying down, which is fine. I noted everything in my logbook and got back on the road. That's when things started going wrong. It was 9:15 p.m. when I first heard the noise. Not the usual cattle sounds. This was different. Louder, more agitated. I checked my interior cameras and saw the animals moving around more than normal. At first, I thought maybe they smelled something that spooked them. Animals have much better senses than people. Sometimes they pick up on weather changes or predators hours before we do. But then it got worse. The vocalizations changed from normal cattle sounds to something I'd never heard before. Deep, guttural bellowing that made my skin crawl. I pulled over at the next wide spot to investigate. When I walked back to check the trailer, what I saw made no sense. Several of the cattle had blood coming from their eyes and noses. Not just a little bit, streams of dark blood running down their faces. In 7 years of hauling livestock, I'd never seen anything like it. My first thought was some kind of infectious disease, maybe hemorrhagic fever or anthrax. That's every livestock hauler's nightmare. A disease outbreak in your trailer. I tried calling the ranch veterinarian, Dr. Martinez, but couldn't get cell service. We were in a dead zone, which isn't unusual in Eastern Oregon. I tried the radio, but all I got was static and some weird interference that sounded almost like voices. The smart thing would have been to turn around and head back to the ranch, but I was already 2 hours out, and the nearest town with a vet was only 30 miles ahead. I decided to push forward and get help in town. That was my first mistake. The bleeding got worse as I drove. Through the cameras, I could see more cattle developing the same symptoms, but it wasn't just blood anymore. Their behavior was changing too. Cattle are generally calm animals, especially during transport when they're confined. These animals were becoming aggressive, ramming into the trailer walls and attacking each other. I'd never seen livestock act like this. By 10:30 p.m., the situation had become dangerous. The cattle were hitting the trailer walls so hard that I could feel it affecting the truck's handling. The whole rig was shaking with each impact. I could hear metal bending and bolts loosening. These animals were displaying strength that didn't make sense. Cattle are strong, but not strong enough to damage a heavy-duty livestock trailer. Then I heard it, the sound of metal giving way. I pulled over immediately and grabbed my flashlight. When I got to the back of the trailer, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Several of the cattle had actually broken through the aluminum side panels. These panels are rated to contain 2,000-pound bulls, but they were peeling back like tinfoil. 3 cattle had escaped and were standing in the road. In my flashlight beam, I could see they were still bleeding from their eyes and noses. But something else was wrong too. Their teeth looked different, longer, sharper. Their eyes reflected the light like a predator's, not like normal cattle eyes. I tried approaching them slowly, talking in a calm voice like we're trained to do with spooked livestock. But instead of running away or clustering together like cattle normally do, they moved toward me in a coordinated way. Not like prey animals, like hunters. The first one charged me. I barely made it back to the truck cab before it hit the driver's side door, hard enough to rock the entire rig. The other 2 joined it, and within minutes I could hear all the remaining cattle breaking out of the trailer. The sounds of bending metal and splintering wood filled the night air. I was trapped in my cab with 40 escaped cattle surrounding my truck. But they weren't cattle anymore, not really. Through my windshield, I watched their faces changing. Their skulls were elongating, their jaws extending. Those teeth I'd noticed were growing longer, becoming fangs. Their front legs were stretching, becoming more like arms. Their hooves were splitting into something that looked almost like clawed hands. And they were eating each other. I sat in that cab for 4 hours, watching through my windows as these things that used to be cattle tore each other apart and fed on the pieces. They moved with intelligence, working together to bring down the larger ones first. They used tools, rocks, and pieces of my broken trailer to break bones and get to the meat inside. But the worst part was how they kept looking at my truck. Every few minutes, one of them would stop feeding and stare directly at me through the windshield. They knew I was in there. They were just saving me for last. Around 3 a.m., they started working together to flip the truck. 12 of these creatures positioned themselves around the cab and started rocking it back and forth. The truck weighs about 17,000 pounds empty, but they were actually lifting it off the ground. I could hear them communicating with each other. Not cattle sounds, but something that sounded almost like language, clicks and grunts that had meaning. I was sure I was going to die in that cab. I used my radio to broadcast mayday calls on every channel, but all I got back was static and those weird voices. I tried my cell phone, but still no signal. My GPS was showing my location as somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Then, right as the sun came up, they stopped. All of them, at exactly the same moment, turned and looked east toward the sunrise. Then they ran. Not like cattle run, but like wolves or big cats. Fast, coordinated, disappearing into the forest like they'd never been there at all. I sat in my truck until 8 a.m., too scared to get out. When I finally did, there was no sign of them. No blood, no torn-up meat, no bodies. My trailer was completely destroyed, twisted metal and splintered wood scattered across a quarter-mile of highway. But there were no cattle anywhere. The state police found me around 9 a.m. I tried to tell them what happened, but how do you explain something like that? They thought I'd fallen asleep at the wheel and crashed, then made up the story to cover for the livestock escaping. The insurance company agreed. My driving record saved my CDL, but barely. The ranch reported all 40 cattle missing. Federal investigators got involved because livestock theft is a federal crime when it crosses state lines. They found DNA evidence in my trailer that didn't match any known species. The case is still open, but they stopped calling me for interviews after the first month. I work in a hardware store now, indoor job, no overnight driving, no empty roads. I don't haul livestock anymore, and I never will again. Sometimes I wonder if those things are still out there in the Oregon forests, hunting in packs, waiting for the next truck full of animals to transform and feed. The company I worked for went out of business 3 months later. Turns out they'd been getting reports of similar incidents from other drivers, but they'd been covering it up. The federal investigation found evidence of illegal genetic modification experiments on livestock, but no one ever got prosecuted. I still have nightmares about those eyes staring at me through the windshield, and I still have that dash cam footage. The insurance company said it was corrupted and unusable, but I know what I recorded. I know what I saw. If you're a livestock hauler reading this, be careful on those empty roads at night. If your animals start acting strange, don't try to push through to the next town. Turn around and get them back to the ranch immediately. Trust me on this one, some deliveries aren't worth making. My name is Lisa Park, and I've been a field representative for the U.S. Census Bureau for 4 years. I started right out of college with a degree in sociology, thinking government work would be safe and predictable. I specialize in rural Oregon surveys, the deep woods communities where people don't trust outsiders, and getting accurate population counts means hiking into places that don't appear on most maps. I've handled everything from militia compounds to off-grid survivalists. But what happened in March 2024 the Cascade Wilderness didn't just change my job, it changed what I am. The assignment looked routine on paper. 47 households scattered across 200 square miles of old-growth forest between the Mackenzie and Santiam passes. Ancient Douglas firs so thick that GPS signals cut in and out, and logging roads that had been closed since the 1992. 5 days to complete the interviews. Camping in my government SUV between remote homesteads. My supervisor Janet gave me the standard equipment. Digital recording device, CR 4471. Census forms, federal ID, GPS unit, and emergency supplies including a satellite phone that worked maybe half the time under the canopy. Weird territory up there, Janet warned. Lot of old timber families, some hippie communes from the 70s that never left. Keep your recordings running. We've had complaints about census workers not following protocol in remote areas. Day 1 went fine. The forest felt normal, even beautiful. Massive trees, clean air, the sound of creeks running with snowmelt. I interviewed 8 families without problems. Timber workers, retirees, a few artists who'd moved out there for privacy. Day 2 started the same way. But as I drove deeper into the woods, following GPS coordinates to more remote addresses, I began noticing things. No birdsong, no squirrels or chipmunks. The forest was completely silent, except for the wind in the trees. By evening, I'd completed 6 more interviews, but each family seemed nervous about something. They'd answer the census questions quickly, then suggest I should move along before dark or not camp anywhere near the old-growth sections. That night, camping in a clearing beside my SUV, I heard them for the first time. Voices in the forest. Dozens of voices, maybe more. Speaking in unison, too far away to make out words. But the rhythm was wrong. Like a chant or prayer, but broken somehow, stuttering, starting and stopping at odd intervals. I grabbed my flashlight and recording device. The voices stopped the moment my light beam hit the trees. Day 3 took me to the deepest part of my territory. Roads that were barely trails, coordinates that led to cabins so hidden I had to park and hike the last half mile. The silence was worse now. Even the wind had stopped. That's when I found household number 34. The family was waiting for me at their cabin door before I even knocked. A man and woman in their 50s, both so thin they looked sick. Behind them, I could see movement in the shadows inside. Census Bureau, I said, showing my ID. I need to verify the number of residents at this address. 47, the woman said immediately. I stared at the tiny log cabin. Maybe 600 square feet. I'm sorry, did you say? 47 people live here, the man confirmed. His voice had that same broken rhythm I'd heard in the forest. I'll need to conduct individual interviews, I said, professional training kicking in. Federal law requires direct verification. They exchanged glances. Most are sleeping. They don't wake up easy anymore. I still need to see them. After several minutes of whispered conversation, they let me inside. The cabin appeared normal. Small living room, kitchen, one visible bedroom, but I could hear them now, voices coming from below. That same broken chanting rhythm. Downstairs, the woman said, lifting a hidden floor panel. I should have left. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But I climbed down into the darkness. The underground space stretched far beyond the cabin footprint, carved from the earth between massive tree roots that formed natural support beams. And there were people everywhere. I counted carefully. 47 people, like they'd said. But something was wrong with them. They sat in rough circles, speaking in that rhythmic chant, but their words kept breaking apart, starting over, like a scratched record skipping. Excuse me, I said to the nearest person, a woman about my age. I need names and ages for the census. She looked at me with eyes that didn't focus right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, she said in time with the others. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. They were counting. All of them. Over and over, But they kept losing track, starting again. I tried talking to others. Same thing, endless counting in broken patterns. Some counted to 20 before starting over. Others made it to 50. A few children could only count to 3. They're practicing. The surface woman had followed me down. For when the census comes, they have to be ready to be counted. How long have they been down here? Time moves different in the deep woods. Some came last year, some came before that. They forget how to count themselves, so we help them practice. I started recording everything, but my device kept malfunctioning. The audio would stutter and skip, matching the rhythm of their chanting. Through an opening in the earth walls, I saw another chamber. More people, but these weren't chanting, they were silent, staring at walls covered in tally marks. Thousands upon thousands of scratches in the dirt and wood. Every person who ever lived in these woods, the man explained, going back to the beginning. Before the loggers, before the settlers. We count them all. The woods remember everyone. I need to go, I said, backing toward the ladder. But you haven't been counted yet. 2 other men appeared from the tunnels. Their eyes had the same unfocused look, and they were counting under their breath. 47, 48, 49, 50. My satellite phone had no signal underground. The recording device was glitching worse, playing back my own voice in broken loops. I was trapped with people who'd been driven insane by... What? Isolation? Something in the water? Or something else entirely? That's when I saw the tree root. Growing through the ceiling, it wasn't like the others. This one pulsed, like a heartbeat. And every time it pulsed, the people counted. The forest knows, the woman whispered. It's been counting longer than any of us. Counting every tree that falls, every animal that dies, every person who enters. But it gets confused sometimes. Loses track, so we help. I tried to run for the ladder, but the counting people surrounded me. Not threatening, just insistent. You have to practice first, they said in unison. Practice counting yourself. One Lisa, just one Lisa, but which one? That's when I saw her. Me. Another me, sitting in the corner, counting quietly to herself. 1 Lisa, 2 Lisa, 3 Lisa. And another me across the chamber. 4 Lisa, 5 Lisa. The surface man smiled. The woods get confused about people. Makes copies sometimes. All the Lisas have to be counted. I ran. Fought my way past the counting people, climbed the ladder, burst out of the cabin into sunlight. But something was wrong. My SUV was gone. In its place sat an identical SUV with a different Lisa inside, filling out census forms. She looked up at me with my own face. Have you been counted yet? I ran into the forest. Behind me, I could hear voices starting up again. 1 Lisa running, 2 Lisa running. I stumbled through the woods for hours, following what I thought was the road back to civilization. But every clearing I found had another census worker, another me. Some were setting up camp, others were interviewing families of people who all looked exactly the same. The forest was making copies. Had been for years. Every census worker, every resident, everyone who'd ever gotten lost in the deep woods, all of them practicing counting, trying to help the forest keep track of its endless duplications. I found a logging road as the sun set, started walking. Behind me, the counting grew louder. Dozens of voices now, maybe hundreds. 1 Lisa, 2 Lisa, 3 Lisa, 4. A state trooper picked me up 6 hours later, hypothermic and babbling about trees that count people. I spent 3 days in psychiatric evaluation before they released me to complete medical leave. The official report says I suffered a psychotic break due to isolation stress. That I was found alone, no evidence of other people, no underground chambers, just me, talking to trees. But I still work for the Census Bureau. Different identity now, different territory. Urban areas only. I can't handle forests anymore, because sometimes, late at night, I still hear them. All the other Lisas, still trapped in those tunnels, still practicing their count. And I wonder, which Lisa am I? The original? A copy? Does it matter? The worst part is the dreams. Every night, I'm back underground with all those people, helping them count. And every time we start over, there's one more person in the circle. One more copy that needs to be tracked. The forest is still counting, still making duplicates. And somewhere in the Oregon deep woods, there are census workers who never came home, who are still down there, practicing their numbers, trying to help an ancient intelligence that can't tell the difference between one person and 100 copies of that same person. I've seen the missing person reports. Other census workers over the years. Search and rescue always comes back with the same story. No trace found, like they just vanished into the trees. But they didn't vanish, they're still there. All of them. Counting forever in the darkness below the old-growth forests, where time moves different and the trees remember everyone who ever lived. Sometimes I drive past the deep woods areas on my way to urban assignments. I can hear them from the road if I listen carefully. Hundreds of voices now, thousands maybe. Still counting, still practicing, still waiting for someone to count them all properly so the forest can finally rest. But the count never ends, because the forest keeps making more. And every night in my dreams, I'm Lisa number 48, 49, 50, counting myself into infinity, while the tree roots pulse overhead and the darkness grows, new copies of everyone who's ever been lost. 1 Lisa, 2 Lisa, 3 Lisa, 4. The count goes on forever.